Hey, so we all have encountered teenagers. In fact, we've all been teenagers at some point in our lives. And we quickly forget what it was like to be a teenager because again, it seems like, the minute we become adults, we kind of forget what teenagers were like and what we went through ourselves. So let's try to understand teenagers. I think it's very important that we do that because teenagers are just a fascinating, species of beings. So the teenage years are very fascinating because it is the year between childhood and adulthood, right? And it's the years between, you've got pre-tween, they call it the tween years, which is pre-teen years, which is 10, 11, 12, and then teenagers are technically from 13 to 19 years old. And it's really the age where, kids, teenagers, young adults are figuring out who they are, right? So let's understand biologically, they're developing, for women, for girls, they're not women yet, for girls, it's usually they're menstruating at this point, their hormonal changes happening, their breasts are developing, they're getting facial hair, all kinds of hairs in their body. And same with boys, boys, their voices change between, it gets a little squeakier before it gets deeper. Again, biologically, they're getting a hair, their different body parts are developing, hormones are changing, and they're just all in all, transitioning into adulthood, right? That's physically, excuse me. But, emotionally, they're also trying to figure out who they are. Now think about it. Teenage years are usually middle school, junior high, and high school. Very, very challenging as is in terms of, peer pressure and whatnot. So you'll often notice that you'll see a group of teenagers and they're all dressed in the same way. That's usually because it's this need to fit in. They're all together kind of experimenting and figuring out, who they are. So you'll see a group of, goth teenagers, or you'll see a group of jocks, and they do this because there's a shared, sort of comfort in identity, in figuring out, do we belong here or do we belong there? And, it's very normal for teenagers to kind of go through periods where, for a few months they're into, I don't know, into the goth phase, maybe longer. And then they all of a sudden outgrow it and they're into the preppy phase. I don't know what the current cool terminology is because again, I'm 44. It's been 20 some years since I was a teenager and the terminology has changed quite a bit. So I know that I'm making reference to things that when I was younger. So forgive me, but I know most of you who are my age will understand that, right? So, we've had, different sort of, cliques in high school. You've got the, these days it's the potheads, or the nerds, the science nerds. You've got the geeks, you've got the cool little, fashionistas, right? You've got all these different things. But again, teenagers are simply trying to figure out who they are in reference to the world around them. Okay, they're trying to figure out what their value systems are, how they believe, and what they feel about different things that are going on in the world. Now, add on to that social media. God bless teenagers. It is so challenging because you've got the added pressure of social media with Snapchat, which is like, I get Snapchat. I don't quite honestly see the point of it because I don't see the point of putting my entire life on every moment that I'm doing for someone to see. I've got a lot of friends on Snapchat because my son, who is in college, insists that I get on Snapchat if I want to keep tabs on what he's doing because he wouldn't, he's busy. So he's like, Mom, if you want to know what I'm doing, just follow me on Snapchat. And, thank God I have a good relationship with him where, he's pretty transparent about what he does. I know other moms and other teenagers who do not allow their parents to be on Snapchat. So because I'm involved with teenagers in different volunteer organizations, I have a lot of Snapchat friends. I don't bother looking at any of their stories. Maybe once a year I'll check on a couple of them, or if they inbox me a message, I'll see something. But I particularly don't care what you're doing, what you're eating, what your dog is doing. Irrelevant. But what I realize is that for teenagers and young adults, again, because teenagers, it doesn't quite stop at 19. The way our culture is shifting and changing, a lot of, 20s, people in their 20s are still acting like teenagers. They still haven't quite, stepped up to face responsibilities because they're in college and, they don't quite have to do the things that they've had to do when maybe, our parents were teenagers. And by when our parents were teenagers, they were already married. They already had babies. They already had responsibilities, versus the teenagers now are still in college and they're pushing responsibility, longer and longer. And so they're able to be more carefree and whatnot. So social media plays in really interesting because, you've got this need to fit in amplified on social media. And it's quite fascinating, how certain, people, teenagers have this need to constantly sort of put, their entire life on social media. And I think it's another way of approval, another way of fitting in. It's this whole thing with how cool your Instagram, feed is, how many followers you have, how cool your stories are. It's again, all a need to fit in, right? So that's interesting. But, you have to understand teenagers are also very, very sensitive beings. They're very sensitive. They act, some of them may act like they're tough, but you have to understand they are raw emotional sponges, right? And as adults and as parents who are around teenagers and interact with teenagers, we have to be particularly sensitive to our words and how we interact with them and what we say to them. So I see this in my practice. And today, particularly, I had 2 teenagers that came in that, seemed like they were good teenage girls, perfect grades, perfect beings. But, for whatever reason, one said, my mom says I'm worthless, because I can't seem to do simple things right, and the other one says, she, what was it? She's a perfect, A student, but again, she doesn't get the attention she needs and she wants because the other sibling who is a troublemaker gets more attention and she's having a nervous breakdown because she just can't handle it. Now, self-esteem, excuse me, I've got candles burning and I'm having a hard time breathing here. So, self-esteem with teenagers is very, very fragile, right? And please, adults, if you're interacting with teenagers, be mindful of how you speak to them. Your words are very powerful. Teenagers, as tough as they seem, are not. It's like you're dealing with an egg, right? If you look at an egg, it appears to be a nice hard exterior, but it's when you really start to hold an egg and the minute you drop the egg, you realize how fragile the egg really is. And to me, teenagers are very similar. They appear tough, but they're not. They're extremely fragile. And top in with that, teenagers are selfish by nature, right? Now, does that make them bad people? No, that's a normal stage of their developmental growth and stage. Their function in life at that stage of being is to figure out who they are and what they're about, right? And so it's all about me, myself, and my needs and my wants. Now, as adults, we get frustrated because all of a sudden, our good little, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old is all of a sudden self-absorbed and obnoxious, right? And we're going, what the hell just happened? And we start calling them selfish. I mean, I know I was, in my mom's words, a selfish teenager. And I realize now as an adult, I was just being a typical teenager, right? So teenagers are just being normal, regular teenagers. Yes, they're being selfish, but being selfish and self-absorbed is a healthy developmental aspect of their teenage growth. If you show me a teenager who's selfless and amazing, that's not the norm, guys. That's fine, wonderful, but that's not the norm. So, be realistic in your expectations of teenagers. Expect them to mess up. Teenagers are forgetful. Teenagers have short-term memory. Teenagers are constantly, and it's been proven in research study after research study, because of all the chemical changes in their body, because of all the physical developmental changes, because of all the social, changes in their body, it's normal for teenagers to be forgetful, to be self-absorbed, to not be, this as responsible, mature, thinking adults are. But that doesn't mean that all teenagers are like that, right? I know plenty of teenagers who are amazing. I know that I was overall a very good, responsible teenager. I volunteered, I served, I did the right thing. I never partied. I wasn't that type of teenager, but I also was very blessed to grow up in a very healthy, regular family with two parents, and the dinners and the meals, and I had a very strong community base that I grew up in Jamaat Khana, in the mosque, in the church. And so I had that function. The Surge Institute has done extensive studies, and they've come up with 40 developmental assets. I think it's a little more than that now. And they've identified what a kid starting with age 1, 2, all the way to teenagers, what they need, what they require to be grounded, to be healthy, to be balanced. And for teenagers, one of the things that's required is an involvement, engagement in the community, an engagement of adults in their lives, whether it's community adults, whether it's teachers, whether it's coaches, that are invested in their interest. So, it's as adults, we are responsible for our teenagers. So, when you are engaging with a teenager, be mindful, be respectful, treat them like young adults, treat them like adults, give them the respect, but understand in the back of your mind that, they're allowed to mess up because, again, they're teenagers. Don't hold them to such, extraordinary standards that are not realistic. They will grow up with our support, with our love, with our constant, motivation and encouragement. They will grow up and hopefully will be wonderful, contributing adults in society. But while they're teenagers, give them a break, right? Let's give them some understanding, show them compassion, show them patience, because you know what? When we were bratty teenagers, God knows the adults around us did that for us, which allowed us to be who we are. So anyways, just wanted to sort of share that. I hope this has been helpful. Please, feel free to comment, feel free to share. And as always, inbox me if you have any questions. God bless and take care. Bye-bye.